coming up.
Millennials and Gen X are the ones that are seeing the highest increase in stress, financial stress, and credit card debt, rising faster than others, presumably because of mortgages and the increasing cost of mortgages and rent. Have you seen any particular trends around those issues yourself that are reflected in the Harris poll?
You talk a lot about how taxes should be removed from the purchase of groceries. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more? What specifically are we talking about? For what taxes are we talking about?
So it's often referred to as the snack tax.
46% of Gen Z are taking whatever little savings or borrowing money to actually pay for food. Have you seen a gradual, maybe not so gradual change in those numbers?
What that means essentially is that people feel the pain. That pain is real.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
The committee is resuming its study on credit card practices and regulations in Canada. Pleased to welcome our witnesses today from Agri-Food Analytics Lab, Sylvain Charlebois, Senior Director, Agri-Food Analytics Lab, and Professor at Dalhousie, with Samantha Taylor, Senior Instructor of Accountancy and Information Science, Dalhousie as well.
It's always great to see a fellow Nova Scotian here before a parliamentary committee, Professor Charlebois. Thank you for coming, and for coming in person. Maybe I can start with Professor Charlebois. Professor, we know that we have record food bank usage in Canada, over 2 million people a month using food banks, a level we haven't seen in decades. And we know that credit card debt in Canada has increased about $30 billion since 2015, a per capita increase of credit card debt of about 20% since then. And in any given month, we know that roughly about half of Canadians, according to the Bank of Canada, don't pay off their credit card debt. And a recent poll by Harris, done this year in 2024, found that the reason that people have changed their credit card habits as that debt has increased, that they cite, is because prices of goods and services have gone higher. In essence, using credit cards to pay for everyday purchases, according to this thing, like food and things that you would normally not use credit for. So I know that we've talked about the cost of living as an impact on the issue of rising credit card debt. And so as part of that, food is being part of that, people buying credit cards, using credit cards to buy food. The basket of food that Canadians purchased in April 2021, if they bought $100 worth of food, it now costs about $121 of food over that time, which is why people are feeling the pinch. So I'd like you to comment a little bit about, if you could, about how much the carbon tax is impacting that increasing food pricing, which is increasing the use of credit cards for purchasing food and therefore credit card debt.
So I've actually addressed this issue several times during my visits in Ottawa, and to fully measure the impact of the carbon tax on retail prices is extremely difficult to do. Which is why our lab has focused on wholesale prices and up the food chain more. And we've always believed that the carbon tax may impact our agri-food sector's competitiveness. Because retail prices can be affected by several factors. Promotions, consumer behavior, the weather. I mean, a lot of things can actually impact prices, especially with dynamic pricing coming in with AI. We're seeing more prices fluctuate on an hourly basis now. So it's hard to correlate a policy affecting the entire supply chain with retail prices. But I would say, I mean, some of the policies that are pushing prices higher are taxes at retail. And I've advocated for the elimination of all taxes on many food products. Because of shrinkflation, there's an increasing number of products that are being taxed at retail, and many of them are healthy options. And in the Food Banks Canada report this week, the Hunger Count, it was suggested to eliminate retail sales, and I support that.
So, as a person who's before entering elected office spent 20 years in retail, I know a bit about what does push up the price, both that a retailer pays and then how it's priced in. And one of the things I know from that business is that when you actually put a tax on the production of that food product, which happens when you're requires energy and other things to produce that product, the carbon tax increases that production cost. And then everything has to be shipped. One of the most expensive parts of selling things at retail is actually the transportation of the goods. And when you increase the tax on fuel with a plan up to 61 cents to quadruple the carbon tax, that increases obviously food costs. All those things increase the price that the retailer has to pay, and then the retailer has to pay tax, obviously the carbon tax on the energy and other aspects of running their retail store network.
Yep.
So doesn't that all compound and create a higher food cost for people, which is causing financial stress?
What the evidence is telling us, if you look at wholesale prices and retail prices in Canada versus, say, the U.S., the gap is incredibly narrow. So there's just no room. And wholesale prices have increased almost 40% more than American wholesale prices, I'm talking about food here, in the last 5 years. Wow. Okay? In America, in the United States, when you look at Kroger or Albertsons or even Walmart, their food division, that gap is significantly higher. So when wholesale prices go up, they do have room. In Canada, most grocers, and I know a lot of people like to blame grocers for exaggerating and profiteering, but we just don't see the evidence. When wholesale prices go up for a variety of reasons, and perhaps the carbon tax may be part of that equation, grocers have no other choice but to push prices higher to protect margins.
Thank you. If I could ask a question to our online witness on bankruptcy. In your opening, you mentioned, Ms. Lang, that the extension of credit is the number one reason cited in a lot of insolvency. And one of the things that we've questioned the banking and other witnesses on here on the credit card study is that they provide other options if people get overextended on their credit card debt, and usually that means transferring them to a line of credit. When some of us have pushed, what do you do with the credit card? Obviously, they don't eliminate the credit card. So when you see these bankruptcies, do you see a combination of growing personal line of credit debt combined with growing credit card debt?
So just to clarify, I think what my opening suggested was that the cause of bankruptcy being connected to credit cards is actually a very, very low percentage. It's under 1% of cases. Noting at the same time that this is not perfect data. It's an open text field that's answered by the debtor and completed by the licensed insolvency trustee. The number one cause that we've seen is loss of income. The number two cause is medical reasons. So to answer your question about credit cards, lines of credit, and the various types of credit, we would have to go back to our data and see if we can help answer that question. It's a bit complex because, again, these are not closed text fields, but I could see what I could provide if you'd like.
Okay. Professor Charlebois, can I ask again that we're seeing some very disturbing things around millennials? Well, maybe this is more appropriate for Ms. Lang. Because in the credit card debt issues, we're seeing, according to the poll of Harris, that millennials and Gen X are the ones that are seeing the highest increase in stress, financial stress, and credit card debt, rising faster than others, presumably because of mortgages and the increasing cost of mortgages and rent. Have you seen any particular trends around those issues yourself that are reflected in the Harris poll about the connection on age, demographics, mortgages, and credit card debt?
So I can tell you that the last data that I saw suggested that under 20% of people who file for an insolvency actually own a home. So we'll keep a close eye to see if that changes. That may with the current interest rates. But the age 18 to 34 demographic in 2023 was 26.5% of the filings and actually decreased from 2022. I haven't looked at 2024 trends yet, but it's usually in that 26% range.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Perkins. Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins.
This buy now, pay later, you mentioned that it adds to the additional debt. It incurs additional debt for consumers. How many consumers, what percentage of consumers do you think are incurring unreasonable amount of additional debt due to this BNPL?
Thank you for your question. It's really too early to tell. So first off, I just want to ask, buy now, pay later. Are we all somewhat...
No, 1 minute. So you don't have evidence because Professor Chalbus, while answering a previous question from a colleague, several times mentioned what he has seen in evidence, what he has not seen in evidence, etc. Do you have any evidence that consumers, if so, how many consumers are getting problem due to this particular scheme?
Thank you. The latest evidence here has that 20% of UK cards have one BNPL data on it. Disproportionately, 84% of the overall transactions are ages 18 to 49. Now, I state UK data because that is the only data that's available right now. It's emerging from a 2023 study.
So, but that data doesn't say that 18 to 49, they're incurring that more than what they require. My problem is that when people come and propose we need to pass new legislation, new regulations, just to safeguard the interest of, say, 5% or 10% who are incurring, we are creating a red tape which affects 90% of the consumers. So, well, the regulations, for us, it looks sound good, it looks great that we are trying to regulate, we are trying to manage the affairs of individual Canadians. That is a nanny state. So my thing is that, please, when you propose new regulations, you have to come out with a study that shows that how regulation helps the people, number of people it helps, and how it does not create red tape to the other people.
I appreciate that, and I really wish we had the data.
Then without data, you are recommending that we bring in the regulation. That is the problem I have here.
Sir, I'm suggesting that we look at leading indicators that suggest that this is an emerging field that can cause compounding debt later down the line.
The emerging fields, we don't know whether its effects are good, bad, or ugly in technology. Like AI, if you listen to one portion of the people, they say that, oh my God, AI is going to destroy everything. There's another set of people who says that AI is going to improve the lives of Canadians and other people around the world. However, just because something is emerging, we are not sure at suddenly, because I respect you, because the organization you come from, you're educated people, when you speak, we policymakers have to listen. But my thing is that you start with the proposal that bring in regulation. That is the issue I have here.
Thank you.
So I appreciate the question. We came here today to propose ideas, okay? Now, these ideas are likely deserving of more exploration and research, okay? We don't have the data, and I think we should have the data. These new technologies are making money invisible. And when money is invisible, the younger generations in particular, and the research is suggesting that, they don't necessarily understand how they're spending their money and how in trouble they get very quickly.
I agree with what you start saying, that you are coming with ideas. That is exactly what we need. What I was not happy, what I was concerned is that you started with that you have to bring in regulation. It's something new. It's making invisible. Now everything is invisible. I am spending more because it's very easy to spend online. So, anyway.
But you're implying that we're asking for more regulations.
You stated that you want regulation.
But doesn't necessarily mean that we actually that's the outcome that we're actually going to be looking for. There are probably other options that we could actually entertain as well.
Yeah, as and when the evidence come, please do come. We need to know. I mean, it is also our responsibility to look into, to instigate reports like the committee can do a study understanding this particular problem more, gather more evidence, and the committee can suggest the government to bring in necessary legislation or regulations or whatever it is. But I was concerned that organizations, people like you coming in and asking directly to bring in new regulation is a problem for me.
There was a comment you just kind of made there around like age demographics on who is borrowing money to pay for food. Do you want to just quickly expand on that? Do you have a report that we could table with us on that, possibly?
Yeah, actually, this report was made public 3 weeks ago. It's called the Canadian Food Sentiment Index. It goes over many different things. We assess values, beliefs, behavior, and debt as well.
Okay.
And
can you table that with this committee?
yes, it's on our website, so we can send it to you.
Yes, please send it to us, because just because it's on the website doesn't mean it'll get into the. So if you can just table it with the committee, I'd appreciate that. 'Cause I think it provides some valuable insight.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about how like taxes should be removed from the purchase of groceries. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more? Like, what specifically are we talking about? For like, what taxes are we talking about?
So it's often referred to as the snack tax, because often there's about, when you walk into a grocery store, there are about 4,600 products that are taxable. And most Canadians actually don't realize it. There's one province in the country that is looking into making sure that people are aware of what's taxable when they visit a grocery store, and that would be Quebec with Bill 72. And I testified in Quebec a few weeks ago about this bill, and I was very supportive of what they were trying to do. It's transparency in aisles, telling consumers what's taxable and what is not. Most people don't look at their receipts. The biggest issue with taxation, as far as I'm concerned, with CRA rules, is that there is an increasing number of products that are now taxable that weren't before. Granola bars is a good example. If you have 6 bars in a box, that's not taxable. 5 bars becomes taxable.
And yet, I've got 3 kids. We buy and we go through a lot of granola bars. Just about every single box of granola bars you buy doesn't come with 6. It comes with 5.
That's right. And I can move on to muffins and ice cream. Under 500 milliliters, ice cream is taxable. Over 500 mil, it's not taxable. And a lot of people just don't look at their receipts. And some grocers, you need almost a PhD to understand what you've been taxed on. Some of them are actually do a better job, but some of them, it's not clear. You have to go to customer service, and I've done that myself, to really verify what you're taxed on. And that's an extra, in some provinces, it's an extra 15%. It's
Wow.
a lot.
Okay. You had a report back in, I think it was 2023, on when people buy food, how do they typically pay? And there was 4 or 5 different provinces where actually credit card use was higher than debit card and cash. So that's obviously a huge problem. What's leading to people to do that?
Well, essentially, it's cash flow. It's cash flow issues affecting households, essentially. And when you go to a grocery store, you tend to use whatever means you can because you need to buy food. It's a necessity of life. One of the reasons why I think this particular problem is only going to get worse is because the battleground for all grocers right now is loyalty. Because of inflation, people have now grown their portfolio of stores where they buy food now. They'll go to dollar stores. They'll go to Giant Tigers. And so grocers, the main chains, are fighting. They're trying to get people back into stores. And the best way to do that is by amplifying loyalty programs through credit. So if you use cards, you can get points. And that's why I think that that combination of loyalty and credit is going to be quite lethal for many, many consumers.
When I look at food inflation, there's a few products in specific I just wanted to pick your brain about here. One of them was actually infant formula. I think you've talked about this before. I'm just wondering, can you talk a little bit about how much inflation on infant formula has been and what that would mean for for a mom or a family?
Yeah, so when you look at all grocery items, the one item that has increased the most in the last 2 years is olive oil. It's almost at 80%, but second is baby formula at 57%. And the reason why we have seen an incredible increase in baby formula prices is because we used to not manufacture baby formula in Canada. We don't. We import from the U.S., and there were two manufacturers in the U.S. that actually had some issues with food safety, Abbott and Nestle. And so we started to import baby formula from Europe for a while, but it really didn't push prices lower. So prices basically just increased. And now we do have a plant in Kingston, Ontario, manufacturing baby formula. It's called Canada Royal Milk. It's owned by China. They process Canadian milk, and they now sell formula at $41 for 900 grams, which is the cheapest baby formula you can find in Canada. But it is a plant owned by China, so right now sales aren't necessarily robust. Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, today is Halloween, exciting day for a lot of kids. Shrinkflation, I mean, I've even noticed how much more I'm paying to buy boxes of candy for Halloween, but then when you look inside the packages and you see how little there is actually in there, it's kind of a double whammy, isn't it? When we look at where inflation has hit people, but then what they're actually getting for value it has shrunk. So just wondering if you can elaborate on that point a little bit.
Yeah, no, shrinkflation is a strategy, and of course with sugar prices have gone up 24% since May. Cocoa prices have gone up 119% since last Halloween. So we were expecting manufacturers to reduce. This year there's a double leveled shrinkflation phenomena, so you get fewer items per box and you get smaller candy. So it's expected, unfortunately, and we see that most categories at the grocery store have been impacted by shrinkflation over the years. And we're at the end of a cycle right now because of commodity prices. They're lower except for meat. We are expecting another wave of shrinkflation probably in a couple of years from now.
Okay, and then if we were to get the federal government to pause the carbon tax, even particularly on food production, but if we could just get them to pause the carbon tax, what benefit would that be for Canadians, but also for food prices?
That's exactly what I recommended to the Finance Committee a few months ago, to pause on the carbon tax to better understand how the policy is impacting food affordability in Canada. And right now it's been very difficult. As a lab, we've been trying to assess the impact. Unless you have firm level data, it's practically impossible to assess. But I would suggest to pause for now, just to understand, for food, just for the food chain, okay? Because right now, I do believe it's putting way more pressure on wholesale and retail right now, making the industry less competitive.
Yeah, so you said from 2019 going on over the last 5 years, food inflation has drastically risen. What year was the carbon tax implemented?
2019.
Okay. And when we look at the way it's going to quadruple in price over the next number of years here, just the carbon tax alone, does that not send the wrong signal to consumers that when we have a price on production, transportation, on energy, what that will do long-term to consumers going forward? To me, I think it's actually quite obvious. I'm from Saskatchewan, right? We're an agriculture region, but we're also an energy-producing region. So we got the two main components right there. So I see it firsthand on my own bills. I grew up on a farm. I know what our costs were, and I know how detrimental these taxes are and can be. Because they say there's an exemption on agriculture. There is on some aspects of it, but not on all aspects of it. And even just those parts of it are devastating to producers. And when you look at the way that economics works and the trickle-down impact of who ends up paying all the bills, producers, like farmers, are price takers, and then consumers are the ones who get stuck paying the bill at the end of the day because everything gets passed on down to the consumer. Mm-hmm. It's a double whammy. I mean, I guess I would end with just saying I simply
guess
agree
you should
with
end because it's the end of your time, Mr. Pastor. So
I was waiting for the question, but
But I'll grab just a bit of time. I feel generous to myself in terms of time today. Thank you, colleagues. You mentioned, Professor Charlebois, that you anticipate another wave of shrinkflation a couple of years from now, just based on what?
commodity prices go up. Typically, we see manufacturers review their costing structure. It happened in 2008 and 9, when oil went up to 147 US. A bushel of wheat was at $9, and wheat is 20% of all calories consumed on Earth. Ukraine basically pushed manufacturers to really review their procurement strategy and packaging strategy as well. My concern about shrinkflation is at three levels. One, I don't think that Statistics Canada actually properly measures food inflation. It underestimates it because it's not we don't see how it's embedded in how they're reading inflation, which is a big problem as far as I'm concerned. Two, packaging. When you buy a shrinkflated product, you're buying a mirage, and there's too much packaging being used. And three is the taxation issue. There are more and more products being taxed as a result of shrinkflation.
So you were saying that basically the basket of goods that's used to calculate the CPI is not taken into account shrinkflation.
We don't see. So Statistics Canada says, and we've met with them, they say that they actually look at shrinkflation and how it's impacting inflation, but we don't see the evidence.
Interesting. And so you anticipate commodities to go up over the course of the next couple of years, which would lead to another wave of shrinkflation, if I
That's right.
Correctly.
And so climate change or El Nino, the two cycles tend to suggest in our models that we're going to be seeing a new wave of higher commodity prices in 2027, 2028.
So mostly based on climate change more so than on geopolitical tensions or currency debasement around the world, or?
Well, geopolitics are a big issue, of course, but when it comes to, say, we were just talking about Halloween, sugar and cocoa. So for cocoa in the Ivory Coast and Ghana, impacted by flooding, and sugar canes were impacted by droughts. So, and beef right now is impacted by droughts.
It's very interesting because you're saying we are going to anticipate another wave of shrinkflation because of the impacts of climate change, while I hear colleagues arguing that the price on pollution is the cause of this inflation, which is kind of a bit of a circular argument, because one is aimed to address climate change. So it's just an interesting set of circumstances, I would guess, or opinions. But I'll leave it at that and turn it over to Mr. Van Bynen.
So you're recommending that cash not be for food purchases. What would that do to the farmers' markets if what your recommendation is to discontinue the use of a credit card or a debit card?
So your question is encouraging the use of cash at farmers markets, or?
No, discontinuing the use of credit cards. What effect would that have on these farmers markets?
Well, I mean, we're not suggesting to discontinue the use of credit cards. We just need to be we just need to make sure that people are aware of the risks using credit cards, and making sure that that how they're spending their money is more visible and tangible. I mean, it's similar to the problems of tipflation these days. People are tipping, and there are lots of fuzzy regulations around tipping right now. People are tipping on taxes, and people don't know that.
Professor Charlebois, I was reading your latest food security index, and there are a couple of other items that stand out on what's happening in the changing Canadian behavior. The first one I'd like to ask you about is actually the change in behavior. I note that on the list of the question, it's figure 2 in your report, in response to recent food price inflation, which of the following changes have you made? That only 6.3% of Canadians said that they haven't changed behavior, and there's a variety of reasons that they have changed it. The number one being seeking out more discounts. I presume that's because of food inflation. I wonder if you could comment on that particular item.
Yes. I mean, that's a very low percentage, to be honest. Typically, I mean, we've been following food prices for 20 years, and many Canadians have not changed behavior until very recently because of food prices. It really has forced them to look at coupons and credit as well very differently, different locations as well. The other thing, if you actually look at the dashboard we have on page 3 of that particular report, to me that's telling of what's going on, particularly with the younger generations and how they spend their money on food. To go back to your comment, Mr. Massé, about using apps, and there seems to be this notion that spending money on food has to be easy. Especially with the younger generations. Food retail sales are flat and dropping per capita in Canada. And most people aren't talking about this. Yes, you heard me. Food retail, despite inflation, food retail sales per capita are dropping. Food service sales, restaurants, are increasing. That at a record high.
Quick service.
Food service restaurants.
Yeah.
And who actually orders through apps to order food delivered to homes? Younger generations, the Uber Eats and all that. And that certainly is concerning. So right now, Canadians are spending $186.95 per capita on food service per month.
On that particular question, what we've seen over the years when people have challenges paying for food, and they make that shift from, say, fresh produce and stuff, that restaurant food, is it not an increase in quick service food? In other words, McDonald's, fast food, which is much cheaper than going to the grocery store in a lot of cases.
In some cases, that's correct. But you have to add taxes to that and delivery charges and all that. Again, that's why I think it's quite concerning. How people spend money on food is concerning, because I don't think they understand how much more things are costing at the grocery store. If you go to the grocery store, you're educating yourself in terms of the cost of living, feeding yourself and your family. If you're continually use apps on credit often, you don't necessarily appreciate how much can you buy with the dollars you have.
So if I go to figure 6, I wonder if this has changed. So one of the shocking things in figure 6 is that, and maybe not surprising to people these days with given food inflation, is that affordability is the biggest chunk of factors in making a decision on what to buy, 47.3%, and nutrition is only a little over 24% a primary reason. Has that changed in the last few years? Have we seen an increase, a flip of that?
No, but the gap between the two has increased. Because right now, I mean, affordability is at 47%, and nutrition, which is second, it's at 24%. We've never seen such a gap. The next time, our next report is in April, so we'll see exactly how things are changing in Canada. But right now, that gap is incredibly high. And so, in other words, what's going on at the retail store is that a lot of people are making nutritional compromises. They're going to the center of the store, and they're leaving the periphery of the store where the fresh products are.
And then in your figure 5, which you referred to earlier, which was boring, dipping into your savings, which isn't meant to buy food or everyday essentials, and borrowing for food is higher and higher when you go to generation. It's higher with the younger generation. So the few great generation that are left is the smallest at 13%, but when you get down to Gen Z, 46% of Gen Z are taking whatever little savings or borrowing money to actually pay for food. Have you seen a gradual, maybe not so gradual change in those numbers?
So that percentage is increasing. Again, we'll see in April if that has increased even more. But when you actually start to unpack the data that we accumulated for this particular report, you're really noticing that the younger generations aren't necessarily aware of how powerful their dollars are, how much they can buy. They don't necessarily understand exactly how inflation has impacted their buying power. And if you buy through credit, you're severely impacted. Your perception is severely impacted as a result.
So what about the perception? Does perception of what's happening in food prices, there's a lot of talk out there, does that affect people's behavior, or is it just the reality?
Last year, it's a good question. Last year, we surveyed Canadians, 9,000 Canadians, asking them in the last 5 years, since March 2020, COVID, how much more food prices have gone up without telling them, and the average answer was 78%.
Wow.
The truth
buying
is,
a lot of olive oil.
and baby formula. But the truth is 24%. So perceptions are absolutely impacting behavior, because there's a lot of people are saying, "Oh my goodness, food prices have tripled." That's not true. There's no evidence of that. But people, what that means essentially is that people feel the pain. That pain is real.
Right, absolutely. Thank you.
Just a quick question, a follow-up on olive oil. One thing I've noticed at the grocery store is that now you'll see next to olive oil like a lot of canola oil and seed oils, which are arguably not as good, not as healthy as olive oil. So have you witnessed a change? Certainly there is a change if groceries put these other substitutes or other products next to olive oil, they know there's demand for it. But you were talking about shrinkflation. Have you noticed also a change in the quality of products that's offered? Like companies going for cheaper products in how they prepare the products that they're selling?
Well, yes, there is some substitution happening for sure in vegetable oil. There are many other options out there, and so when olive oil becomes too expensive, they will actually look at other options. There are other options than canola oil, but the one thing that concerns us very much is food fraud, especially with everything liquid at the grocery store. It can be adulterated very easily. And olive oil is a huge target. Right now, we're working with some colleagues out of Greece, and they believe that 20% of all olive oil in Europe is adulterated right now because of higher olive oil prices. We don't know the answer here in Canada because we're not testing.